In the scorching heat of the Afghan desert, where the temperature reached 120 degrees and the air shimmered like broken glass, most people would collapse after walking just a few hundred yards. But on that fateful Tuesday morning in July 2018, a 22-year-old Navy medic named Sarah Chen would prove that the human spirit can push far beyond what the body thinks is possible. What started as a routine patrol mission would end with Sarah carrying a wounded Marine twice her size across 200 steps of treacherous terrain, using nothing but her determination and medical training. But the real story isn't about those 200 steps. It's about what happened in the 72 hours that followed, when her act of courage triggered a chain of events that would shake the entire military base and change the lives of everyone involved. This isn't just another war story. This is about a moment when everything you think you know about strength, sacrifice, and human connection gets turned upside down. By the time you finish reading what really happened after Sarah collapsed at the base gates, you'll understand why this story spread through military circles like wildfire, and why it's still being talked about in Pentagon briefings today. Some stories are forgotten within days, others echo through generations. This is one of those stories that reminds us why ordinary people can do extraordinary things when everything is on the line. Sarah Chen had been awake for 36 hours straight when the call came through the radio at 0430 hours. She was sitting in the medical tent at Forward Operating Base Wolverine, trying to finish her report on the previous day's casualties, when Sergeant Rodriguez burst through the canvas flap with sweat already streaming down his face despite the early morning hour. "Doc, we need you suited up in 10 minutes, Rodriguez said, his voice carrying that particular tension that meant someone's life was hanging in the balance. "We've got a patrol that's been out of contact for 6 hours. Last known position was Grid 47 Delta, near the village of Qasadar." Sarah's hands automatically reached for her medical kit even before her mind fully processed the words. After 14 months in Afghanistan, her body had learned to respond to emergencies before her conscious thought could catch up. The weight of the kit felt familiar in her hands, like an extension of herself. Every pocket, every piece of equipment had been arranged and rearranged countless times, until she could find anything she needed in complete darkness.
"How many soldiers are we talking about?" she asked, already pulling on her body armor. The ceramic plates felt heavier today, or maybe she was just more tired than usual.
The constant heat, the irregular sleep, the steady stream of wounded soldiers had all taken their toll over the past year. "4 Marines from Delta Company," Rodriguez replied, checking his rifle for the third time. They were supposed to check in every 2 hours. Last transmission was at 22:30 last night. Could be equipment failure, could be they're pinned down, could be worse. Sarah nodded, understanding the unspoken possibilities. In this part of Afghanistan, radio silence usually meant trouble. The Taliban had become increasingly bold in their attacks on small patrols, and the terrain around Qasadar was perfect for ambushes. Rocky hills provided cover for insurgents, while the narrow valley bottoms offered few escape routes for American forces. The helicopter ride to the search area took 20 minutes, during which Sarah reviewed her medical protocols. One more time. Combat medicine was different from anything they had taught her in training. In a hospital, you had time, equipment, and backup. Out here, you had whatever you could carry and whatever skills you could remember under pressure. Every decision could mean the difference between a soldier going home to his family or going home in a flag-draped coffin. Captain Morrison, the patrol leader, briefed them over the helicopter's intercom system. "Intelligence suggests there might be IED activity in the area. We're going to establish a perimeter about half a click from their last known position and work our way in. Chen, you stay close to the center of the formation. If we find casualties, we need you ready to work immediately." As the helicopter descended toward the landing zone, Sarah could see the harsh beauty of the Afghan landscape spreading out below them. Ancient mountains thrust up from the desert floor like the backbone of some massive buried creature. Villages scattered across the valley looked like collections of mud blocks baked by centuries of sun. It was a land where people had been fighting for thousands of years, and where she was now part of the latest chapter in that endless story. The helicopter touched down in a cloud of dust that turned the world into a brown, choking fog. Sarah jumped out with the others, immediately feeling the heat hit her like a physical blow. Even at this early hour, the temperature was already climbing toward what would be another day above 110 degrees. Her uniform was soaked with sweat before they had walked 50 meters. The search began methodically, with the 12-man rescue team spreading out in a careful pattern designed to cover the maximum amount of ground while keeping everyone within supporting distance of each other. Sarah found herself walking between Private Jackson, a 19-year-old from Ohio who never stopped talking about his girlfriend back home, and Corporal Williams,
a quiet veteran of 3 deployments who seemed to anticipate trouble before it happened.
They had been searching for nearly 2 hours when William suddenly held up his hand, signaling the patrol to stop. Everyone dropped into defensive positions, weapons ready, eyes scanning the rocky terrain ahead. In the distance, Sarah could hear something that made her heart rate spike. The sound of someone calling for help in English.
"That's Sergeant Martinez," Jackson whispered, recognizing the voice. He was the patrol leader for the missing team. Captain Morrison made the decision quickly. "We're going in fast. Chen, be ready."
If Martinez is calling for help, it means someone's hurt bad. They found the missing patrol in a small depression between 2 hills, sheltered from view but trapped by the terrain.
3 of the 4 Marines were conscious and alert, but the 4th lay motionless on his back while Sergeant Martinez worked frantically to stop bleeding from what appeared to be a severe leg wound. "IED went off about 8 hours ago," Martinez explained rapidly as Sarah dropped down beside the wounded Marine.
Kowalski took the worst of it, lost a lot of blood, been in and out of consciousness. Radio got destroyed in the blast, couldn't call for help. Sarah's training took over as she assessed Private Kowalski's condition.
The young Marine from Detroit was unconscious, pale, and had lost more blood than anyone should lose and still be breathing. The improvised tourniquets that Martinez had applied had probably saved his life, but they were only a temporary solution.
Kowalski needed surgery, blood transfusions, and intensive care, none of which were available 20 miles from the nearest forward operating base. "We need to get him back to base immediately," Sarah announced, already working to stabilize his condition for transport.
"He's lost too much blood, and I think there might be internal injuries." But as she worked, a new problem presented itself. The helicopter that had brought them was scheduled to return with another mission and wouldn't be back for 6 hours.
The terrain was too rough for vehicle evacuation, and Kowalski was too unstable to wait for another aircraft. They were going to have to carry him out on foot. The nearest suitable landing zone for medical evacuation was 2 miles away, across terrain that would challenge a healthy person carrying no equipment. Kowalski weighed 190 pounds, plus whatever additional weight his gear added. The other 3 wounded Marines could walk but were in no condition to help carry their unconscious teammate. "I'll take the first carry," announced Staff Sergeant Powell, the largest man in the group at 220 pounds.
"We'll rotate every couple hundred meters." Sarah knew the mathematics of the situation were grim. Carrying an unconscious person across this terrain, in this heat, would exhaust even the strongest soldiers quickly, but they had no choice. Kowalski would die if they waited for another helicopter, and they couldn't leave him behind. The first mile went better than expected. Powell and Jackson took turns carrying Kowalski with help from 2 others, while Sarah walked alongside monitoring his vital signs and adjusting his medical care as they moved.
The wounded Marine's pulse was weak but steady, and his breathing remained regular. Maybe they would make it after all. But halfway through the second mile, the situation began to deteriorate rapidly. The soldiers were exhausted from the heat and the physical strain of carrying their injured comrade. Powell stumbled and nearly dropped Kowalski, catching himself just in time. Jackson was showing signs of heat exhaustion, and 2 other soldiers had used up most of their water. It was then that Sarah made a decision that would change everything. As the strongest soldiers faltered under the weight and the heat, she stepped forward and said the words that would echo through the base for months to come. "I'll carry him." The protests came immediately. Sarah was 5'4" and weighed 125 pounds. Kowalski outweighed her by more than 60 pounds, and that was before accounting for his equipment. In the crushing heat and difficult terrain, it seemed impossible that she could manage what the larger, stronger soldiers were struggling to accomplish. But Sarah had something that went beyond physical strength. She had watched too many soldiers die because help arrived just a few minutes too late. She had written too many letters to families explaining how their sons and daughters had fought bravely before succumbing to wounds that might have been treatable with faster evacuation. She carried the weight of every life she hadn't been able to save, and that weight gave her a determination that no amount of physical training could provide. "Doc, this isn't going to work," Captain Morrison said quietly. "You don't have the body mass for this kind of carry." Sarah was already adjusting her equipment, redistributing weight, and checking the straps on her medical kit. "Captain, with respect, Kowalski doesn't have time for us to debate this. His blood pressure is dropping and he's showing signs of shock. Every minute we delay is a minute closer to losing him." She positioned herself next to the unconscious Marine and began the complex process of getting him up onto her shoulders in a fireman's carry. The weight was enormous, far heavier than anything she had ever attempted to carry before. Her legs shook with the effort, and for a moment it seemed like she might collapse immediately. But then something remarkable happened.
Instead of focusing on the weight or the impossibility of the task, Sarah began to think about Kowalski's family. She remembered seeing a photo in his wallet during the initial medical assessment. A young woman with a bright smile and a toddler on her lap.
His wife and daughter waiting for him to come home from a war they probably couldn't even find on a map.
Step by step, she began to move forward. Each footfall was a conscious decision. Each meter of progress a small victory against the laws of physics and human endurance. The other soldiers formed a protective formation around her, ready to take over if she collapsed, but also beginning to realize that they were witnessing something extraordinary. The terrain ahead was the worst part of the journey. A series of rocky slopes and loose gravel that would challenge any soldier carrying a full pack, let alone someone attempting to transport an unconscious person twice their size.
But Sarah had stopped thinking about the impossibility of what she was doing. Her world had narrowed down to three things: the next step, Kowalski's breathing, and the image of his family waiting for him to come home.
As they approached the final hill before the evacuation landing zone, Sarah's strength began to fail in ways that went beyond simple physical exhaustion. Her vision started to narrow, and she could feel her body beginning to shut down non-essential systems to preserve energy for the critical task at hand.
But the landing zone was visible now, just 200 steps ahead, and she could hear the distant sound of a helicopter approaching. Those final 200 steps would become the stuff of military legend, but for Sarah in that moment, they were simply what needed to be done. One step, then another, carrying her wounded comrade toward the help that would save his life. She had no way of knowing that her actions were being observed through binoculars by officers at the base, or that the story would spread through the military community like wildfire.
All she knew was that a fellow soldier needed help, and she was not going to let him down. Not today, not ever.
The weight on her shoulders was more than just Kowalski's body. It was the weight of every promise she had made when she took the oath to serve, every commitment she had made to bring everyone home alive. As the helicopter landed in a cloud of dust and medical personnel rushed forward to take over Kowalski's care, Sarah finally allowed herself to collapse. She had carried him the full 200 steps to safety, using strength she didn't know she possessed, driven by a determination that would inspire others for years to come. But this was only the beginning of the story.
What happened next would transform Sarah from an unknown medic into a symbol of courage and determination that would reach far beyond the boundaries of the military base where she served. The moment Sarah released Kowalski into the hands of the medical evacuation team, her body finally surrendered to the impossible demands she had placed upon it. Her legs buckled, and she collapsed face first into the dusty ground of the landing zone, her body convulsing as dehydration and heat exhaustion took their toll.
Amanda Foster, the chief medical officer who had rushed out to meet the incoming casualty, immediately redirected her attention from Kowalski to Sarah. "Get me an IV line in her right now," she shouted over the roar of the helicopter rotors. Core temperature is probably through the roof, and she's showing signs of severe dehydration. As the medical team worked to stabilize Sarah, Captain Morrison filled Dr. Foster in on what had happened during the evacuation.
His voice carried a mixture of admiration and disbelief as he described watching the small Navy medic carry a Marine nearly twice her size across 2 miles of Afghan terrain in 115-degree heat. "I've seen a lot of brave things in 15 years of service," Morrison told Dr. Foster as they loaded Sarah onto a stretcher. "But I've never seen anything like that. She just wouldn't quit no matter how much her body was breaking down." In the base hospital, Sarah drifted in and out of consciousness for the next 18 hours. Her body temperature had reached dangerous levels, and her kidneys were showing signs of stress from extreme dehydration. Foster monitored her recovery. She began to piece together details about the young medic that painted a picture of someone whose courage ran much deeper than a single moment of heroism. Sarah's medical records revealed a pattern of extraordinary service that had somehow flown under the radar of the base's recognition system. Over her 14 months in Afghanistan, she had been involved in more medical evacuations than any other medic on the base. She had volunteered for the most dangerous missions, often accompanying patrols into hostile territory when other medics were unavailable. Staff Sergeant Martinez, who had been part of the stranded patrol, visited Sarah while she was recovering. He brought with him a story that Dr. Foster found even more remarkable than the dramatic rescue she had just witnessed. "3 months ago, Doc Chen saved my life," Martinez explained, settling into the chair beside Sarah's hospital bed. "We were on patrol near Kandahar when my squad got hit by sniper fire. I took a round in the shoulder, severed an artery. I was bleeding out fast." Martinez paused, his voice becoming thick with emotion. "Chen was with another unit about half a mile away when she heard the firefight over the radio. She didn't wait for orders, didn't ask permission. She just grabbed her kit and ran straight into the fight zone while bullets were still flying. Worked on me for 20 minutes under fire. Never stopped moving, never panicked.
Doctor.
Foster reviewed Sarah's service record more carefully and discovered a series of similar incidents that had been recorded in various unit reports but never compiled into a comprehensive picture. Sarah had treated over 300 wounded soldiers during her deployment, an extraordinary number for someone who wasn't assigned to a frontline combat unit.
But perhaps most remarkable was what Dr. Foster learned about Sarah's background and motivations.
Born in San Francisco to immigrant parents who had fled Vietnam after the war, Sarah had grown up hearing stories about American soldiers who had risked their lives to help Vietnamese civilians escape the chaos of conflict. Her father, Dr. David Chen, had been a medical student in Saigon when the city fell in 1975. Sarah always said she owed a debt to the American military. Her father explained during a video call that Dr.
Foster arranged while Sarah was still recovering. When she was young, she would ask me to tell her stories about the soldiers who helped us get out of Vietnam.
Some of them didn't make it home because they stayed behind to help people like us. David Chen's voice broke slightly as he continued. She said she was going to spend her life making sure no soldier would ever be left behind if she could help it. I thought it was just the idealism of youth, but now I understand she meant every word. As Sarah gradually regained consciousness, Dr. Foster began to understand that the dramatic rescue of Private Kowalski was not an isolated incident but part of a larger pattern of selfless service that defined Sarah's approach to her military duties. The young medic had been quietly building a reputation among the soldiers she served with as someone who would never give up on a wounded comrade. But Sarah's recovery revealed another dimension to her character that surprised everyone who thought they knew her.
When she finally woke up fully alert, her first words were not about her own condition or the recognition she was receiving for her heroism. Instead, she immediately asked about Kowalski's status and wanted to know if there was anything more she could do to help his recovery.
"How's his leg?" were literally the first coherent words Sarah spoke when Dr. Foster examined her on the morning after the rescue.
Did the surgeons in Germany think they could save it? What about his family? Have they been notified that he's okay? Dr. Foster was struck by Sarah's complete lack of self-awareness about the remarkable nature of her own actions.
When the doctor attempted to discuss the heroism of carrying Kowalski to safety, Sarah seemed genuinely confused about why anyone would consider her actions noteworthy.
Any medic would have done the same thing,
Sarah insisted, wincing as she tried to sit up in her hospital bed. "That's what we're trained for. You don't leave wounded soldiers behind, period." There wasn't really a choice to make. This attitude puzzled Dr. Foster until she began interviewing other medical personnel who had served with Sarah. What she discovered was that Sarah's definition of normal medical service was far beyond what most people would consider reasonable or expected. Corporal Jennifer Walsh, another Navy medic who had served alongside Sarah for 6 months, provided insight into how Sarah approached her duties. She never slept if there were wounded soldiers in the hospital, Walsh explained. Even if they weren't her patients, even if she wasn't on duty, she would find ways to help. She'd sit with guys who were having nightmares, write letters for soldiers who couldn't use their hands. Anything that needed doing. Walsh continued. The thing about Chen is that she never saw medical care as just a job. For her, every wounded soldier was personal. She knew their names, knew about their families, remembered details about their injuries months later. I've never met anyone who cared so much about people she'd never met before they got hurt. As news of Sarah's heroic rescue began to spread through the base, other stories started emerging that painted a picture of sustained courage and dedication that went far beyond what anyone had realized. Soldiers began coming forward with accounts of times when Sarah had gone above and beyond the call of duty to provide medical care under dangerous or difficult circumstances. Private Anderson, a Marine who had been wounded in an IED explosion 4 months earlier, sought out Dr. Foster to tell his story. "Doc Chen probably doesn't even remember this," he said, "but when I got hurt, my unit was pinned down by enemy fire for 3 hours before the fighting stopped enough for a full medical evacuation." Anderson's voice became emotional as he continued. "Chen crawled out to where I was wounded, right in the middle of the firefight, and worked on me for those whole 3 hours. Every time the shooting started up again, she'd cover my body with hers to protect me from shrapnel. She saved my life, but she also probably saved my sanity. Having someone there who cared whether I lived or died made all the difference." These stories began to create a new understanding of Sarah's character among the base leadership. Major General Patricia Williams, the commanding officer of the regional command, personally visited Sarah during her recovery to learn more about the young medic whose actions were already being discussed at the Pentagon. "Medic Chen," General Williams began, settling into the chair beside Sarah's bed. "I've been in the Army for 25 years, and I've never read a collection of incident reports quite like yours.
You've been involved in more successful combat medical operations than some entire medical units.
Sarah looked uncomfortable with the attention from such a high-ranking officer. General, I was just doing my job. We all are.
Everyone here is risking their lives for the mission. General Williams smiled at Sarah's modesty but pressed the point. Medic Chen, what you did for Private Kowalski was extraordinary, but it's not the first time you've exceeded normal expectations. I've been reviewing your service record, and I'm seeing a pattern of courage and dedication that goes well beyond standard medical protocols.
What General Williams didn't tell Sarah at that moment was that her actions had already triggered a comprehensive review of combat medical procedures and recognition protocols throughout the military. The story of a 125-pound medic carrying a 190-pound Marine to safety had captured the attention of military leadership at the highest levels, but the most significant development was still to come.
Dr. Foster had been documenting Sarah's medical techniques and approaches, and what she was discovering was that Sarah's success rate with critically wounded soldiers was statistically remarkable. Despite serving in one of the most dangerous regions of Afghanistan, Sarah had not lost a single soldier who was alive when she began treating them.
This perfect record was almost unprecedented in combat medicine, especially for someone who regularly volunteered for the most dangerous missions. Military medical researchers wanted to understand what Sarah was doing differently that was producing such exceptional results.
The answer, Dr. Foster was beginning to understand, lay not just in Sarah's medical skills but in her approach to treating wounded soldiers as whole human beings, rather than just medical cases.
Sarah's insistence on learning personal details about her patients, her willingness to provide emotional support alongside medical care, and her absolute refusal to give up on anyone who was still breathing, were creating medical outcomes that challenged conventional wisdom about combat medicine. As Sarah continued to recover from her ordeal, the full implications of her actions were just beginning to ripple outward from forward operating base Wolverine. What had started as one medic's determination to save a wounded comrade was about to become a catalyst for changes that would affect military medical care, recognition systems, and the very definition of heroism in combat. But for Sarah, lying in her hospital bed and asking repeatedly about Kowalski's condition, all that mattered was that another soldier was going home to his family. She had no idea that her actions were about to transform not just her own life, but the lives of countless other soldiers who would benefit from the attention her story was bringing to the quiet heroes who served without recognition or reward. The real story was just beginning, and the next phase would reveal truths about military service, human courage, and the power of individual actions to create ripple effects that reach far beyond their original scope.
3 days after Sarah's collapse at the landing zone, Lieutenant Colonel James McCarthy arrived at Forward Operating Base Wolverine with orders that surprised everyone who knew about them. McCarthy was not a medical officer or a combat commander, but rather a specialist in military personnel evaluation who worked directly for the Joint Chiefs of Staff. His mission was to conduct a comprehensive review of Sarah's service record and the circumstances that had led to her extraordinary act of heroism.
What McCarthy discovered during his investigation would eventually reshape how the military identified, recognized, and utilized exceptional personnel who might otherwise remain unnoticed in the vast bureaucracy of modern armed forces. McCarthy's first stop was a private meeting with Major General Williams, who briefed him on the preliminary findings from the base's own internal review of Sarah's service.
The picture that emerged was of a soldier whose contributions had been systematically undervalued by traditional military recognition systems. "Colonel McCarthy," General Williams began, spreading out a series of reports across her desk. "What we're looking at here is a failure of our entire evaluation structure.
Medic Chen has been performing at an elite level for over a year, but because she's quiet, modest, and doesn't seek attention, she's been essentially invisible to our recognition protocols." McCarthy reviewed the documentation carefully.
Sarah's efficiency reports were consistently excellent, but they didn't capture the full scope of her contributions. Her supervisors had noted her reliability and competence, but the standardized evaluation forms didn't have categories for the kind of sustained heroism that characterized Sarah's daily service. "The problem," General Williams continued, "is that our system is designed to recognize dramatic, one-time events or measurable statistical achievements. Someone like Chen, who performs extraordinary service consistently over time, falls through the cracks because what she does looks normal to the people who work with her every day."
McCarthy's investigation took an unexpected turn when he began interviewing soldiers who had been treated by Sarah during their time at the base.
What he found was a network of testimonials that painted a picture of medical care that went far beyond standard protocols and entered territory that military researchers were calling transformational combat medicine. Sergeant First Class Michael Torres, a Special Forces operator who had been seriously wounded 6 months earlier, provided McCarthy with insights that would become central to the investigation's findings. "Sir, I've been wounded 3 times in 4 deployments," Torres explained during his interview.
"I've been treated by a lot of medics, some good, some not so good. Doc Chen is different." Torres paused, choosing his words carefully. "When most medics work on you, you're a problem to solve, a set of injuries to treat. Chen made you feel like you were the most important person in the world."
"She'd tell you about your family while she worked, ask about your hometown, make you believe you were going to make it home no matter how bad things looked." What Torres described challenged fundamental assumptions about combat medicine that had guided military medical training for decades.
Traditional doctrine emphasized speed, efficiency, and emotional detachment as the keys to effective battlefield medical care. Sarah's approach seemed to contradict these principles while achieving superior results.
McCarthy interviewed Dr. Foster to understand the medical implications of Sarah's techniques. "Colonel, what we're seeing with Medic Chen's patients is unprecedented," Dr. Foster explained.
"Her survival rates are statistically impossible according to conventional models, but the results are documented and verified." Dr. Foster pulled up Sarah's case files on her computer.
"Look at this pattern.
Soldiers treated by Chen have lower infection rates, shorter recovery times, and significantly better long-term psychological outcomes compared to patients treated using standard protocols. She's achieving results that challenge everything we thought we knew about combat medicine." The medical data was compelling, but McCarthy was even more intrigued by the psychological profiles Dr. Inallis Foster had compiled. Soldiers treated by Sarah showed markedly lower rates of post-traumatic stress disorder, depression, and other psychological complications that typically followed serious combat injuries.
"It's as if the way she treats them physically affects their mental healing as well," Dr. Foster continued. "Soldiers tell me that being cared for by Chen made them feel valued as human beings rather than just casualties. That emotional component seems to have real medical benefits."
McCarthy's investigation expanded to include interviews with soldiers who had served alongside Sarah on various missions. What emerged was a consistent picture of someone who had redefined the role of combat medic from a purely medical function to something that resembled a combination of medical care, psychological support, and moral leadership.
Captain Rodriguez, who had led multiple patrols with Sarah, provided McCarthy with a perspective that illustrated how her influence extended beyond medical care. "Sir, having Chen on a mission changed the whole dynamic of the unit," Rodriguez explained.
"Soldiers fought harder and took better care of each other when she was around, because they knew someone cared that much about bringing everyone home." Rodriguez continued, "It wasn't just about her medical skills, though those were exceptional. It was about what she represented. She made every soldier feel like their life had value, like someone would move heaven and earth to save them if they got hurt. That kind of confidence changes how soldiers perform in combat."
These testimonials began to reveal the broader implications of Sarah's approach to military service.
Her individual actions were creating ripple effects that improved unit cohesion, combat effectiveness, and long-term military retention among soldiers who served with her. McCarthy's most significant discovery came when he reviewed Sarah's personal correspondence with families of soldiers she had treated.
With permission from Sarah and the families involved, he was given access to dozens of letters and emails that Sarah had sent to parents, spouses, and children of wounded soldiers. The letters revealed a level of personal investment in her patients that went far beyond professional obligation. Sarah had maintained correspondence with over 50 families, providing them with detailed updates on their loved ones' recovery, offering emotional support during difficult periods, and maintaining relationships that continued long after the soldiers had returned home. One letter, written to the parents of a soldier who had lost his leg in an IED explosion, exemplified Sarah's approach.
"And Mrs. Davidson, I know you're worried about how Tommy is handling his injury, and I wanted you to know that he's one of the strongest people I've ever met.
Yesterday, he spent 2 hours helping another wounded soldier write a letter to his girlfriend. Tommy says he wants to be a counselor for other amputees when he gets home."
Your son is turning his pain into purpose, and that tells me everything I need to know about how you raised him." The letter continued with specific details about Tommy's physical progress, psychological state, and plans for the future.
It concluded with Sarah's personal phone number and an invitation for the family to contact her directly if they had any concerns about their son's recovery. McCarthy discovered that Sarah was maintaining this level of personal involvement with every family connected to soldiers she had treated.
She was spending hours of her off-duty time writing letters, making phone calls, and providing support that was completely outside her official duties. When McCarthy questioned Sarah about this extensive correspondence, her response encapsulated the philosophy that had driven all of her exceptional service. "Colonel, these families sent their sons and daughters to war trusting that we would take care of them," Sarah explained. "When someone gets hurt, That trust extends to making sure the family knows their loved one is being treated as a human being, not just a medical case.
Sarah's voice became emotional as she continued. These parents are lying awake at night, wondering if their child is scared, in pain, or feeling abandoned thousands of miles from home. If I can give them some peace by letting them know that someone cares about their son or daughter as much as they do, then that's part of my job too. This perspective challenged traditional boundaries between professional military service and personal involvement that McCarthy had never encountered in his 15 years of personnel evaluation.
Sarah had essentially created her own expanded definition of military medical service that included emotional care for families as well as physical care for soldiers. McCarthy's investigation revealed that Sarah's approach was producing measurable benefits that extended far beyond individual medical cases.
Families who received Sarah's personal attention and communication showed higher levels of support for military service, were more likely to recommend military careers to other family members, and reported greater satisfaction with military medical care. Perhaps most significantly, soldiers who had been treated by Sarah and whose families had received her support showed markedly higher rates of military retention and career advancement after their recovery.
The personal investments Sarah made in each case seemed to create lasting loyalty and commitment to military service. As McCarthy compiled his findings, he began to understand that Sarah's story represented more than just individual heroism.
It was a case study in how exceptional military service could be overlooked by systems that weren't designed to recognize sustained excellence that didn't fit traditional patterns. The implications of McCarthy's investigation would soon extend far beyond forward operating base Wolverine.
Military personnel systems, medical training protocols, and recognition programs would all be reevaluated in light of what had been learned about Sarah's approach to service. But the most immediate impact of the investigation was the realization that there might be hundreds or even thousands of other service members whose exceptional contributions were being overlooked by military systems that weren't designed to identify and recognize sustained, quiet excellence.
Sarah's story was becoming a catalyst for examining fundamental questions about how the military identified, developed, and rewarded the kind of service that truly made a difference in the lives of soldiers and their families. The investigation that had begun as a review of one medic's heroic actions was evolving into a comprehensive examination of military culture, values, and recognition systems. The next phase of Sarah's story would involve decisions at the highest levels of military leadership that would affect not just her own career, but the careers of countless other soldiers whose exceptional service had gone unrecognized for too long. The secure video conference that took place on a Thursday morning 2 weeks after Sarah's heroic rescue would later be remembered as a turning point in how the American military approached recognition, personnel development, and the definition of exceptional service.
Participating in the call were Secretary of Defense Patricia Henderson, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff General Robert Martinez, and the chief medical officers from all service branches. Lieutenant Colonel McCarthy's investigation report had made its way up the chain of command with unprecedented speed, propelled by findings that challenged fundamental assumptions about how the military identified and utilized exceptional talent.
The report's conclusions were summarized in a single paragraph that would be quoted in Pentagon briefings for years to come. Petty Officer Second Class Sarah Chen represents a category of military service member whose contributions have been systematically undervalued by current recognition and utilization systems. Her individual actions have produced measurable improvements in unit cohesion, medical outcomes, family satisfaction, and military retention that suggest our current approaches to personnel evaluation may be missing entire categories of exceptional performance.
Secretary Henderson opened the discussion with a question that went to the heart of the military's personnel challenges. General Martinez, if we have one Sarah Chen at Forward Operating Base Wolverine, how many others are serving at similar levels without recognition or appropriate utilization throughout the entire military structure? General Martinez had been asking himself the same question since reading McCarthy's report.
Madam Secretary, our preliminary analysis suggests that our current system may be missing up to 20% of exceptional performers, particularly those whose service is characterized by sustained excellence rather than dramatic single events. The implications of this assessment were staggering. If accurate, it meant that tens of thousands of exceptionally capable service members were being underutilized, overlooked for advancement, and possibly leaving military service because their contributions weren't being recognized or rewarded appropriately. Dr. Fraser,
Elizabeth Warren, the military's chief medical researcher, presented findings that elevated Sarah's story beyond individual recognition to institutional significance. The medical protocols and patient care approaches developed by Petty Officer Chen are producing results that surpass established best practices in every measurable category. Dr. Fantasy thanks.
Warren explained. We've analyzed her techniques and compared them with standard combat medical training.
And what we're seeing is a fundamental reimagining of the medic's role that integrates psychological support, family communication, and holistic patient care in ways that were never formally taught but are proving more effective than conventional approaches. Dr. Warren's presentation included data that convinced everyone on the call that Sarah's individual innovations had broader applications. Soldiers treated using Sarah's expanded protocols showed 40% better recovery rates, 60% lower rates of psychological complications, and family satisfaction scores that exceeded anything previously recorded in military medical research. But perhaps most significantly, Dr.
Warren revealed that Sarah had been documenting her techniques and training other medics in her approaches without any official authorization or support. She had essentially created an informal medical training program that was producing medics whose performance exceeded that of traditionally trained personnel. What Petty Officer Chen has done, Dr. Warren concluded, is prove that our current medical training paradigm is fundamentally incomplete.
She's identified critical components of combat medical care that weren't included in our formal curriculum but are essential for optimal patient outcomes. This revelation prompted Secretary Henderson to ask a question that would reshape military medical training. Dr.
Warren, are you telling me that a Navy medic with no formal training and curriculum development has created medical protocols that outperform our institutionally developed programs? The answer was yes, and the implications extended far beyond medical care. Sarah's innovation suggested that exceptional frontline personnel might be developing improved approaches to military challenges throughout the system without formal recognition or institutional support.
Admiral Jennifer Collins, the Navy's chief of personnel, raised the question that was on everyone's mind. What are we going to do about Petty Officer Chen specifically, and how do we use her case to identify and develop similar personnel throughout the military? The discussion that followed would result in decisions that affected not just Sarah's career but military personnel policies across all service branches. Secretary Henderson made it clear that Sarah's case would be treated as a model for comprehensive military personnel reform.
I want Petty Officer Chen brought back to Washington immediately, Secretary Henderson announced. She's going to work directly with our training development teams to formalize her medical innovations. But more importantly, I want her case study used as the basis for a complete review of our personnel identification and development systems. The decision to bring Sarah to the Pentagon was unprecedented for someone of her rank and experience. But the benefits of her innovations were too significant to leave undeveloped.
More controversially, Secretary Henderson ordered that Sarah's story be used as the foundation for a military-wide initiative to identify other exceptional performers who might be operating below the radar of traditional recognition systems. General Martinez was tasked with implementing what would become known as the Chen Protocol, for identifying sustained exceptional performance that didn't fit conventional recognition patterns. The protocol involved comprehensive reviews of service records, peer evaluations, and outcome measurements that went beyond traditional performance metrics. But the most significant decision of the conference was Secretary Henderson's directive that Sarah's approach to military service be studied as a potential model for redefining the relationship between military personnel and the families of those they serve.
Sarah's extensive family correspondence and support work had produced measurable improvements in military family satisfaction and retention that suggested fundamental changes in how the military approached family relations. The implementation of these decisions began immediately.
Sarah received orders to report to Walter Reed Medical Center in Washington, D.C., where she would work with a team of military medical researchers to formalize her innovations into new training protocols. But she was also assigned to work with personnel development specialists to help design systems for identifying other service members whose exceptional contributions were being overlooked.
When Dr. Foster briefed Sarah on her new assignment, the young medic's reaction was characteristic of the modesty that had kept her contributions hidden for so long. "Ma'am, I don't understand why they want me in Washington," Sarah said. "I'm just a medic who was doing what needed to be done. There are hundreds of medics serving in Afghanistan who are just as dedicated as I am."
Dr. Sapasa,
Foster smiled at Sarah's response, which perfectly illustrated the mindset that had led to her being overlooked by traditional recognition systems. "Sarah, that's exactly why they want you in Washington. You don't see what you do as exceptional because you've redefined normal. The military needs to learn how to identify and develop people who think the way you do."
People? The news of Sarah's reassignment spread through Forward Operating Base Wolverine with remarkable speed, generating reactions that revealed how profoundly her service had affected everyone who had worked with her. Soldiers who had served alongside Sarah began coming forward with stories that hadn't been included in McCarthy's original investigation, creating an even more comprehensive picture of her impact. Staff Sergeant Williams, who had served on 5 patrols with Sarah, sought out Dr. Foster to share his perspective on what Sarah's reassignment meant for the soldiers she was leaving behind.
Ma'am, Chen being recognized like this is long overdue, but I hope they understand what they're taking away from the soldiers here, Williams said. She wasn't just a medic to us.
She was our insurance policy, our guarantee that if something went wrong, someone would move heaven and earth to get us home.
Williams continued, I hope whatever they have her doing in Washington is important enough to justify taking that away from the soldiers who are still fighting here. This concern was echoed by dozens of other soldiers who visited Dr. Foster to express similar sentiments.
The unanimous opinion was that Sarah deserved recognition and advancement, but her departure would leave a void that would be difficult to fill. Dr. Foster forwarded these concerns to Lieutenant Colonel McCarthy, who included them in his final report to Pentagon leadership. The testimonials reinforced the conclusion that Sarah represented a category of military service whose value was difficult to quantify but impossible to ignore.
The final element of Sarah's Pentagon assignment involved a component that surprised everyone involved. She would be working with military family support specialists to develop formal programs based on her informal family correspondence and support work. The Pentagon had concluded that Sarah's innovations in family relations were potentially as significant as her medical innovations.
Major General Williams personally briefed Sarah on this aspect of her new role. Petty Officer Chen, your work with military families has produced satisfaction and retention improvements that our formal family support programs haven't been able to achieve, General Williams explained.
The Secretary of Defense wants you to help design a new approach to military-family relations that incorporates the personal touch and genuine care that characterizes your correspondence with families. This could affect how the military interacts with hundreds of thousands of military families.
As Sarah prepared for her transfer to Washington, she remained focused on the same principles that had guided her service in Afghanistan. Her primary concern was ensuring that her departure wouldn't negatively affect the medical care available to soldiers at Forward Operating Base Wolverine. Sarah spent her final week at the base training other medics in her techniques and documenting her approaches in detail. She also personally visited every wounded soldier in the base hospital to ensure continuity of care and to provide families with contact information for ongoing support. The farewell ceremony organized by the base leadership drew hundreds of soldiers who wanted to express their appreciation for Sarah's service. The event was remarkable not just for its size but for the diversity of personnel who attended. Officers and enlisted soldiers from every unit on the base gathered to honor someone whose rank and position would normally make her invisible at such events. Captain Morrison, who had led the mission that resulted in Sarah's heroic rescue of Private Kowalski, spoke for many when he addressed the gathering. Petty Officer Chen represents everything that's best about military service.
She reminds us that heroism isn't about rank or recognition, but about caring so much about your fellow soldiers that you'll do whatever it takes to bring them home. As Sarah boarded the transport aircraft that would take her to her new assignment, she carried with her more than just personal belongings and orders.
She carried the hopes of a military establishment that was betting that her individual innovations could be scaled up to improve service for millions of military personnel and their families. The decisions made in that Pentagon conference room would ultimately affect military training, recognition systems, and family support programs across all service branches.
But for Sarah, the transfer to Washington represented something simpler. An opportunity to help more soldiers and families on a larger scale. What she didn't yet realize was that her story was about to become public knowledge, transforming her from an unknown medic into a symbol of military service that would inspire a new generation of Americans to consider military careers and redefine public understanding of what heroism looked like in modern warfare. 6 months after Sarah Chen arrived at the Pentagon, the ripple effects of her story had expanded far beyond anything the military leadership had anticipated when they made the decision to bring her to Washington. What began as an effort to formalize one medic's innovations had evolved into a comprehensive transformation of military training, recognition, and family support systems that would affect every branch of the armed forces. Sarah's first assignment at Walter Reed Medical Center had been to work with Dr. Rebecca Martinez, the military's leading expert in combat medical training, to develop new protocols based on her battlefield innovations. What they created together would revolutionize how military medics were trained and how they approached patient care in combat situations. Working with Sarah has been like discovering a missing piece of medical training that we never knew was missing, Dr. Martinez explained to the congressional subcommittee that was reviewing the new training protocols 6 months after implementation. Her techniques aren't just producing better medical outcomes, they're producing better soldiers and stronger military families.
The new training program, officially designated as Comprehensive Combat Medical Care, but universally known as Chen protocols among military medical personnel, had been implemented across all service branches with results that exceeded even the most optimistic projections. Medical personnel trained using Sarah's integrated approach were producing recovery rates 45% better than traditionally trained medics. With family satisfaction scores that had transformed military medical care from a source of anxiety.
But the medical training innovations were only the beginning of Sarah's impact at the Pentagon.
Her work with military family support specialists had led to the creation of the Military Family Connection Program, a comprehensive approach to family relations that incorporated Sarah's philosophy of treating each military family as individuals deserving personal attention and ongoing support. Colonel Patricia Hayes, who had been tasked with implementing the family support program based on Sarah's innovations, briefed senior Pentagon leadership on the results 6 months after the program's launch.
The Chen family support model has produced the highest family satisfaction ratings in military history, Colonel Hayes reported. More significantly, we're seeing measurable improvements in soldier retention, family stability, and civilian support for military service.
The numbers behind Colonel Hayes' assessment were remarkable. Military families participating in the Chen Family Support Program showed 60% higher satisfaction rates compared to families receiving traditional military family services. Equally important, soldiers whose families were enrolled in the program showed significantly higher retention rates and career advancement compared to soldiers whose families received standard support services. Perhaps most significantly for long-term military planning, children from families in the Chen program were expressing interest in military careers at rates 3 times higher than the general population.
Sarah's approach to making military families feel valued and supported was creating generational impacts that would affect military recruitment for decades to come. Sarah's work at the Pentagon had also led to the implementation of the Sustained Excellence Recognition Protocol, a military-wide initiative designed to identify exceptional service members whose contributions were being overlooked by traditional recognition systems.
The protocol used analytical techniques developed from Sarah's case study to identify soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines whose service patterns suggested exceptional performance that hadn't been formally recognized. Lieutenant Colonel McCarthy, who had conducted the original investigation of Sarah's service, was now leading the military-wide implementation of the recognition protocol. His findings after 6 months of operation validated the original assessment that the military was dramatically underutilizing exceptional personnel. We've identified over 12,000 service members whose performance profiles match the patterns we saw in Sarah Chen's service record, McCarthy reported to the Joint Chiefs of Staff.
These are people who have been performing at exceptional levels for years, without appropriate recognition, advancement, or utilization. The implications of these discoveries were profound. The military was beginning to understand that it had been operating with a significant blind spot that was preventing optimal utilization of some of its most capable personnel. The Sarah Chen phenomenon, as it came to be known in Pentagon circles, was not an isolated case but representative of a much larger population of exceptional service members whose contributions had been systematically undervalued. But perhaps the most unexpected development in Sarah's story occurred when it became public knowledge through a feature article in Military Times that had been approved by Pentagon leadership as part of a broader effort to improve public understanding of military service. The article, titled "The Medic Who Redefined Heroism," introduced Sarah's story to a civilian audience that was hungry for positive examples of military service. The public response to Sarah's story exceeded anything military public affairs specialists had experienced. Within 48 hours of the article's publication, Sarah had received over 10,000 letters and emails from civilians expressing gratitude for her service and asking how they could support military families. News networks requested interviews, book publishers offered contracts, and speaking bureaus proposed lecture tours that would have made Sarah wealthy beyond anything possible through military service. Sarah's response to this attention was characteristic of the modesty and focus that had defined her military career. She declined all commercial opportunities and used her public platform exclusively to promote military service and support for military families. Her speeches at civilian events consistently emphasized the exceptional dedication of all military personnel rather than her individual achievements. Dr. Amanda Foster, who had remained in touch with Sarah after her transfer from Afghanistan, visited her in Washington to see how she was adapting to her new role and public attention. What she found was someone who had remained fundamentally unchanged despite the dramatic transformation in her circumstances and recognition.
Sarah's office at the Pentagon is covered with thank you letters from military families and photos of soldiers she's helped treat, Dr. Foster observed.
She keeps track of the recovery progress of over 300 soldiers she treated in Afghanistan, maintains correspondence with their families, and somehow finds time to personally respond to every letter she receives from the public.
Foster continued. The remarkable thing about Sarah is that becoming famous hasn't changed her priorities at all. She's still focused exclusively on helping soldiers and their families, just on a much larger scale. The broader impact of Sarah's story on military recruitment and public perception of military service became apparent within months of the article's publication. Military recruiting stations across the country reported significant increases in high-quality applicants who specifically cited Sarah's story as inspiration for considering military careers. More significantly, the story attracted attention from college graduates and professionals who might not have otherwise considered military service.
The image of military service as an opportunity to make a meaningful difference in people's lives, rather than simply a job or patriotic duty, resonated with young Americans who were looking for careers that combined personal fulfillment with social impact. Colonel Sandra Mitchell, the Army's chief recruiting officer, briefed Pentagon leadership on the recruitment implications of Sarah's story 6 months after it became public knowledge. The Chen effect has fundamentally changed how civilians perceive military service, Colonel Mitchell reported. We're seeing applicants who want to serve because they've learned that the military values the kind of caring, innovative service that Sarah represents. The recruiting impact was particularly strong among women and minorities, demographics that the military had been struggling to attract in sufficient numbers. Sarah's story demonstrated that military service could provide opportunities for meaningful contributions regardless of background or physical characteristics, challenging stereotypes that had limited military recruiting in diverse communities. Educational institutions also responded to Sarah's story with new programs designed to prepare students for military service that emphasized the humanitarian and service-oriented aspects of military careers. ROTC programs reported increased enrollment, and military academies saw applications from students whose essays consistently referenced Sarah's example as inspiration for their career decisions. The international impact of Sarah's story surprised everyone involved. Military medical organizations from allied countries requested information about the Chen protocols, and several foreign militaries began implementing training programs based on Sarah's innovations. Sarah found herself consulting with medical officers from Australia, Canada, the United Kingdom, and other NATO allies who wanted to understand how her techniques could be adapted for their own forces. But the most meaningful impact of Sarah's story from her own perspective continued to be measured in individual lives improved, rather than institutional changes achieved. She maintained personal correspondence with over 500 military families, continued to track the recovery progress of every soldier she had treated, and somehow found time to mentor dozens of young medics who sought her guidance. Private Kowalski, the Marine whose life Sarah had saved with her heroic 200-step carry, had made a full recovery and was completing his education using military benefits when he visited Sarah in Washington a year after his rescue. His perspective on Sarah's story provided insight into the personal meaning behind all the institutional changes her service had inspired.
"Ma'am, I know everyone talks about what you did for me that day in Afghanistan," Kowalski said during their reunion. "But what really changed my life was realizing that someone cared enough about me as a person to risk everything to save me. That knowledge has affected every decision I've made since then," Kowalski continued. "I'm studying to be a teacher now because I want to have the same impact on kids that you had on me. I want them to know that someone believes they're worth saving, worth investing in, worth caring about. That's the real lesson from what you did." As Sarah completed her first year at the Pentagon, the full scope of her impact was still expanding. Military medical training had been revolutionized. Family support programs were producing unprecedented results. Recognition systems were identifying thousands of previously overlooked exceptional service members, and public perception of military service had been fundamentally transformed. But for Sarah Chen, sitting in her Pentagon office surrounded by thank you letters from military families and photos of recovered soldiers, the most important measurement remained the same as it had been during her first day of military service. How many people had she helped today, and how could she help more tomorrow? Her story had proven that individual actions driven by genuine care for others and sustained over time could create ripple effects that transformed entire institutions and inspired thousands of other people to pursue lives of meaningful service. The 200 steps she had taken carrying Private Kowalski to safety had ultimately carried the entire military toward a better understanding of what true service meant and what kind of people it should recognize, develop, and celebrate. The legacy of Sarah Chen would continue to influence military service, family support, and public perception of heroism for generations to come. But it began with a simple commitment that any person in any profession could embrace: to treat every person she encountered as someone worthy of her very best efforts, regardless of the recognition or reward that effort might bring. With her last strength, she carried a wounded Marine 200 steps. What happened next shook the base.